Okay, well, thank you guys. Thank you everyone for spending this evening with us. Thank you especially to Dr. Carbaugh for joining us once again. I know the last event that you hosted for us, we had no idea all of the things we didn't know, and I know it was very well received and very helpful. We just had a few moments where we tried to dabble in licensure, and you so graciously pointed out that it is in itself such a big topic. So I am grateful to everybody who's joining us and just providing this opportunity for us. So before we get started, I just wanted to share a few things about OPAGs. So for those of you who are not members, OPA has a student division, which is OPAGs, and it provides a lot of opportunities such as this and some leadership opportunities for graduate students. It's very low demand, very high demand, as involved as you want it to be. OPAGs really has a little bit for everybody. It's a great place to kind of get in touch with the community, that sort of thing. So I just wanted to point out that $25 to join if you're not a member already. We also have campus rep positions and board positions coming up. So for anybody who is looking to get into leadership positions or know a little bit more about OPAGs, please reach out to me. My name's Stacey Henry, and my email is on the OPA website, I believe. And we would love to give you more information about that. And lastly, we do have an internship workshop coming up May 22nd. So there'll be a variety of Ohio internship directors available to meet with in small group, one-on-one in the afternoon, and a lot of great information about how to apply for internships. So it's really never too early to get that information. So with that, I will pass it over to Brittany. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to hearing all that you have to offer.
My pleasure. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much. OPAGs and ECP were natural fit to collaborate often, so I know we're happy to be here. For those that don't know me, I am a resident at the Cleveland VA. I completed both my master's and my doctoral training at Cleveland State University. And so, the plight of the graduate student is very still near and dear to my heart, and however I can help support that community is meaningful for me. I'm going to go ahead and jump into our kind of content for the evening, and when we switch gears to our panel, I'm going to more thoroughly introduce our panelists, but I do want to give a special thanks to Dr. Hoyman, who's going to be my co-moderator today. She is going to be moderating the chat. So what I want to encourage all of you participants to do is, if you have questions as we're going through, please type them in the chat. That way Dr. Hoyman can moderate that and let us know. We'll either address it in the moment, or we will certainly address it in the Q&A at the end of the content portion. And we have also Dr. Alex Carbaugh, Dr. Carla Antonucci, and Dr. Teresa Young here with us as our panelists. And like I said, I'll present them in the manner they deserve here when we get to that section. So yes, this is a whole talk on licensure. There's a lot of information. It's really important to put this out here because when I was a graduate student just a couple years ago, I didn't even know what jurisprudence was. I mean, I had no idea of the path to licensure. I did not understand what was all involved. I knew there were tests, but didn't understand that process, and it felt very confusing. And no one was giving me that information. I felt like it was like pulling teeth trying to find that info from people. And sometimes you go to the websites and it's maybe not always clear. And so I think just hearing it from people who have gone through this is important. We do have Dr. Samantha Gooden, unfortunately could not be here with us this evening. She had a family emergency, but we will miss her. So I do want to, these are kind of our objectives for the evening, but I do want to, I don't even know if I can, I'm not even gonna try to switch out of my screen share mode because I don't want to cause any issues. I did have a poll for you all, and I wanted to know just a bit more about how our audience, and so feel free to actually, for this portion, unmute yourself and chime in. But my question to the attendees here is, how familiar are you, or do you feel you are, with the steps towards licensure? I want to get a sense of where people are at right now.
Very unprepared.
Okay. Have you heard of EPPP?
Yes.
So we've heard that phrase.
Yes. I have a study packet that I'm going through because I just felt that that would prepare me the best.
Do you mind sharing like what company or where you got?
Oh yeah. So the study packet that I am doing is through Psych Prep. And based on just what I was looking for, it took me a couple months to figure out which one would work for me. And I talked to some of my colleagues who had been through it, except for the one, even the ones who said, wait, give me a second to remember, because I blocked that part out. But yeah, so Psych Prep. And so far, I've done like the study strategies portion. And I'm about to start they have a thing where you test and then you look at your stuff and then you test again. So I'm about to start that process in a couple of weeks.
Very cool. I think this is why it was hard to get info, because people block this out.
Yeah.
How about others? How familiar do you say you are with licensure?
Brittany, it's a little hard to hear you at times.
How about others? How familiar are others feeling about licensure?
Honestly, I am not very familiar. I am a second year grad student, just doing this more to familiarize myself a little bit ahead of time, because I'm one of those anxious warriors that like plans 8 steps ahead. So if you do this again next year, I will again be here. But I'm honestly not very familiar. Like, my university has talked on it, but because they're juggling whether they're going to switch between the EPPP version 1 or the second version that they're kind of kicking around, my university is kind of tight-lipped and not really giving us much direction at the moment, because we don't know what's going on.
We'll be taking on part 1 and 2. If you have not heard of that yet, not worry. And also, don't even fret about EPPP at the moment if you're one of those people that's actually actively studying and trying to take it. Right now, we don't have an EPPP Part 2 in Ohio. So, but let's jump in then. I'm gathering that people are here because they don't know as much of the process. So, of course, we're going to talk about the steps to the process, and then we will dig a little bit deeper into what the test content are and some study strategies, and like have already been kind of alluded to. We'll briefly, I'll point out what the EPPP2 is, but it'll be included in the slides. All of this material will be made available to you after the presentation. And then, of course, we will conclude the evening tonight with the Q&A. So very good. So step 1, you're done. You are ready to start thinking about licensure. Where do you begin? Well, you go to that website that's listed there. And I think one thing that's wonderful about these slides, if I do say so myself, is it's got all of the helpful websites and links that you're going to need. Now, of course, content changes, so you're always going to want to kind of re-up this information if we provide this seminar in the future. Hopefully it'll be updated material, of course. But as of now, this is the state of things. You're going to go to that website listed under step 1, and you are going to complete a new applicant profile. You're going to register yourself with the Ohio Board website. After that, you're going to gather all the necessary information and forms. We're going to go into detail on that next. There is a hefty fee of $300, and you will pay that fee. So you have to gather your materials. We'll talk about what those are. And then there's a fee to apply, just to apply for licensure and get that profile. Then you're going to submit the application and the fees and wait for the board to review your application. And step 4 is the board will then enter your information into an online EPPP registration system. This is a separate website. This is through ASPPB. ASPPB is who manages the actual EPPP test. And we're going to talk about what the EPPP is, but the EPPP is that licensing test. It is that multiple choice question where you sit down and you take the licensure exam. And that is what that is. The Ohio board registers you as a psychologist. The ASPPB is who actually manages and handles and schedules you for your EPPP. Once your information is uploaded and the board says you're good to go, you're going to get 2 emails. One is going to be advising you that the board has uploaded your information to the system. And the second email will be for you to verify your account. This is really important. You need to verify your account. You need to click on that link in that second email and verify your account within 90 days. That's just to verify your account. You do not have to take the EPPP within 90 days. This is just to create your account, and you'll need to make sure that you verify. So when you get that email, just open it, just click on it. This is just the beginning steps. So the application, what does the full application actually consist of? You're going to need your transcripts sent to the, whatever. And I should say, of course, this is with emphasis on Ohio. We're going to talk a little bit about if you're getting licensed elsewhere, but of course, being Ohio graduate students, we're going to focus on Ohio. The process could be a little similar, different, give or take. We'll talk about some of those state differences later, but of course the emphasis is on Ohio. So the Ohio board needs your transcripts. Eventually, once you take the EPPP, they'll need your EPPP score. That'll be sent to them directly from ASPPB after you take it. There is a manual, a licensure prep manual that in theory kind of walks through the information that I'm walking through you with tonight, but obviously it's a document. You don't have the opportunity to get a lot of detail or to ask questions, but there is a form that you'll need to sign acknowledging that you received and read that manual. You'll send them back a form. There's a background check that you'll need to get and make sure that that's completed. Your background check cannot be submitted outside of a year from when you actually are hoping to receive licensure. So, I mean, if you went and submitted your background check right now, but you don't take your licensure exam, you don't plan to get your final license for another couple of years, that wouldn't be helpful. So you're going to do your background check closer to that time. And then there will be a verification of all of your training hours. You can verify hours in a couple ways in Ohio. In all, you will need 3,600 total qualified supervised training hours. But this, again, can be accumulated from different places. So one of those places is internship. You'll have to complete the APA accredited internship, or if it's not accredited, there's other forms, but let's say you're completing an accredited internship, there's a Form A, that you will submit to the board to verify your hours. At the VA, our internship is listed as 2,080 hours. Really, some part of that is leave. The internship verification maxed out at 2,000. So you can be verified up to 2,000 hours for internship. The rest of those remaining 3,600 hours can be accumulated through either a formal postdoc where you're getting these hours that you can verify, or if you decide not to do a postdoc, your practicum hours. So then you'll need kind of forms from each of your various practicum sites in order to verify that you've accumulated those hours. So 3,600 hours comes from internship and then either residency or practicum. And the manual can go into more detail on what forms you need. So whether your site is accredited or not accredited, there are different forms. So you'll read that info as it pertains to you. But this is where you're getting your hours from. These are the forms you'll be sending in to verify. So a couple notes. Using practicum hours may make obtaining licensure in other states a little bit more challenging. So this is something where you are going to want to think ahead. Where do you want to get licensed? Look up their state board's expectations, the same way that you can look up Ohio's on those websites on the previous slide, and decide what do you need to do. So for instance, Florida requires 4,000 hours, not 3,600. So if I get licensed, registered at 3,600 hours, great. I'm qualified in Ohio, I get my license. But that does not meet the hours required for Florida. So I would have to take that into consideration. Some states require you to have a postdoc. They want internship and postdoc hours in order to verify, in order to count. Other states will also accept practicum. So you have to take into account what those states are willing to accept, what their rules are. Oops. So in theory, another note, in theory, you can take the EPPP basically as soon as you graduate with your doctorate, you're eligible. You could, in theory, use your prac hours and internship and sit. However, you cannot, you must wait to sit for jurisprudence exam once you have obtained enough postdoctoral hours to meet the 36-hour requirement. So what this means is if you decide to use internship and postdoc to count towards your license, if you want internship and postdoc hours, not internship and practicum hours, then you need to make sure that you've been on postdoc long enough to accrue the amount of hours that the state requires, in this case, 3,600 hours. So in other words, you started postdoc in August, you've been studying all year on internship, you're ready to get licensed. Well, you didn't meet the hour requirements. It's not going to cut it. So in order to sit for that final piece, which is the jurisprudence, you got to make sure you have all your hours. You can sit for EPPP as soon as you want. You got to make sure that you can't sit for jurisprudence until you're able to verify all of the needed hours. Banking credentials and applying for licensure are related but separate processes. So we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I don't want this to get confusing for people. I think when I've had a lot of discussions with peers and other kind of students and colleagues, it gets confusing because the Ohio board banks your credentials in a system called PsyPro. For any of you that are considering board certification, they use PsyPro. So if you're already linked in with PsyPro, you might think, oh, PsyPro's got my details. The Ohio board, I don't need to send my transcripts to the Ohio board. They've got it through PsyPro. False. So that's a backwards process. So you want to keep those ideas kind of separate in your head. All right. When you're ready, and again, we're going to talk about studying in a little bit, but when you're ready and scheduled to take EPPP exam, you can take the EPPP in Ohio as soon as you graduate, like we were discussing. You're going to complete the EPPP application form. This will generate an EPPP authorization test email. You're going to establish a login with the Pearson VUE website. So now you've got a profile with the Ohio State Board, and now you'll have a profile with Pearson VUE. So you can pay the exam fees, and you can schedule a testing appointment, and you can pay the test center fees. So all of that, once everything has been verified, you get those emails that say you're good to go, come to the Pearson VUE website, create your profile, and schedule your exam. Great. All in all, at least right now in Ohio, those fees amount to $687.50. $600 for the exam, $87.50 is the test center fee. There's a 90-day window of eligibility to complete the exam. Some of this is a little bit altered right now due to COVID. I know that they are a little bit laxed so I think it used to be that you could only reschedule the exam you can only schedule the exam about 3 months out. I think you can schedule further at this point because of COVID, and I don't know that there's like a limit on when you can reschedule. So there's some kind of accommodations right now because of COVID, but this is how it is kind of in normal times. The EPPP study, not necessarily study, but content or overview handbook is listed at that website there. All right, you've scheduled it, you've taken it, and again, we're going to talk about the content and studying in a minute. Let's say you passed the EPPP. Now you're ready for part 2 of the licensure process. So part 1 is the psychology kind of content. That's the EPPP exam. Part 2 of licensure is the psychology law portion. This is what was known as the jurisprudence exam. Prior to COVID, this required you to travel down to the state capital, Columbus, and complete an in-person oral exam. You would have studied, after you're done with the EPPP, you would have studied Ohio psychology law and be ready to talk about the law kind of verbatim, word for word. You want to make sure you're using the law's words as it's written. Be able to do this oral exam with some reviewers or exam proctors at the state capitol. Now, because of COVID, it's done virtually, which is fantastic. And there's some wonderful members of the ECP committee who have put together fantastic efforts to help reform the jurisprudence exam for good, virtually just being one of the ways. The questions are drawn directly and exclusively from the Ohio Revised Code and the Ohio Administrative Code. So that is what you are studying and kind of memorizing for this test. Now, I talk about the advocacy efforts to reform the jurisprudence because in some states, the jurisprudence looks different. It might be an online multiple choice test. Other states require the oral version as well. So different states have different expectations for their jurisprudence exam. That manual is located at that website that I've shared. So you can schedule to take the jurisprudence as soon as you pass the EPPP, allowing yourself enough time to study, making sure you've met all of those licensure hour requirements. But the other thing to consider is that very often the slots for the jurisprudence fill up quickly, especially in pre-COVID times. I was hearing, let's say you passed the EPPP tomorrow, you weren't getting in for your jurisprudence for a couple months. Those slots, when they were held in person, filled up pretty quick. My understanding is they've opened up a bit more. It's a bit easier to get in now because it's virtual, but you'll still want to keep that in mind if you're trying to time things out. You're going to want to take allowing some time to get even scheduled. You'll want to take that into account. All right, so that's the licensure. You pay the fees, you send in the information, you verify your hours, you pass EPPP, and then you pass jurisprudence, and now you're licensed. And in Ohio, you receive the license card via email the next day, and your certificate in the mail about 2 weeks later. So that is the process. That's the path. But here's some special considerations. So rescheduling or canceling the EPPP. They say that when you get that email that says you're allowed to schedule, that you should wait to schedule until you're ready. Some people get it on the books. They'll schedule as far out as they can to light the fire for them to study. It's your money, it's your gamble, it's your strategy, it's how you want to do that. But there are some pretty clear, strict rules about rescheduling and what that might entail financially for you. So rescheduling or canceling your exam up to and including 31 calendar days before the appointment, there's no charge. But if you reschedule less than 31 days, so within the month, but more than 24 hours before the exam, you're at least paying the test center fee. If you no-show or you reschedule or cancel within 24 hours of your scheduled exam, you forfeit all of those fees. You will have to pay again and schedule again. Also, unfortunately, if you do not pass the exam, all of those fees are gone. You will have to pay in full again to schedule and take the exam again. Your score on the EPPP reflects the number of items you answer correctly. Points are not taken away for incorrect answers, so it's in your best interest to answer all of the items. And keep in mind, actually, that a sizable majority of applicants do pass on the first try. But I'm in this process right now. As full disclosure, I'm not licensed yet. I am applying, so I am going through the studying and this process. I have been hearing a lot from kind of mentors and supervisors that like, this is a test. You got to reframe this for yourself. There are fantastic clinicians that have failed on the first try. This is not a measure of your clinical ability. You got to really understand how to take this test. You've got to study it. I feel like a lot of people compare it to the GRE in some sense, in that it's just like it's just this gatekeeper test, and you just got to get through it. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad clinician. There are fantastic clinicians that do not pass it on the first try and must retake it. I know directors of clinical training programs who have not passed it on the first try. I don't want that to discourage people, but a sizable majority of folks do pass. There are 4 equivalent forms of the EPPP in circulation at any given point. So about every 6 months, one form is retired and a new form is introduced. Retaking the exam. You can retake the exam no more than 4 times in any kind of 12-month period. The ASPPB recommend you wait 90 days before you take it again, because they hope that you're studying. So use that time to really study and make it worth your $687. But in Ohio, like the minimum before you could take it again is 30 days. So you have to wait at least 30 days before you could retake it. And again, no more than 4 times in 12 months.
Also, just to jump in, you also want to give yourself, if you don't pass the first time, give yourself some time to just recharge. You put in a lot of work, so if you don't pass, it's okay. Take some time to recharge and then get back into the studying, but don't feel pressured to need to jump right in.
Yes, thank you for adding that. Take some time. I will say, think this through. Like, let's say if you want to go on to postdoc, think through your year might go. It might benefit you at the kind of the start of the year to see when in the year you'll have approximately met the hours, and plan this out. If you generally plan to take it because you'll have met your hours in June, that's the earliest you could take it, then you want to maybe shoot for that, because if you fail it, then you're giving yourself time to retake it and then still get your jurisprudence done before you would finish residency, if that was your plan that made sense for you. So it might help to just kind of sit and feel more manageable, to kind of sit down, maybe work backwards from a timeline and think about this. And definitely, like Lisa said, give yourself some human time too. So let's talk about the test itself. So the EPPP Part 1, which is, again, all we have in Ohio right now, this is the knowledge portion of our field. There's 225 items, 175 are scored, and 50 are these kind of like research items, non-scored. You'll need to bring 2 forms of ID with you. I've talked about the test fees. You'll have 5 minutes once you get in to agree to the terms, 5 minutes to complete a tutorial. The exam itself is 4 hours and 15 minutes, and then there's 5 minutes at the end to do a survey. There are no scheduled breaks. From my understanding, you can take as many breaks as you want, but that clock is still running. So 4 hours and 15 minutes to get it done. And it is very sterile environment. So there's no jewelry, there's no anything. If you bring a purse, it's going in a locker. There's no phones. Be prepared for that environment. Maybe practice your studying that way if that kind of environment is difficult for you. Certainly you can apply for accommodations if you have kind of a documented health disorder that would warrant some reasonable accommodations. I do encourage you to apply for those in this situation. Everything you can to optimize your opportunity, but test environment is very sterile. And the ASPP.
Real quick again, I think during COVID, also some of the testing centers are requiring that you wear a mask, which might be a really different change if you're used to studying without a mask. So that was an experience that I had taking a different exam recently, that you had to wear a mask. I just wasn't, even though we were really spread apart, I just hadn't really thought about that because I hadn't practiced. So it was just a little bit more cumbersome and annoying, but we're all used to masks now. But just as a heads up, that might be something just to kind of, while you're practicing, is wear a mask while you're studying or something like that.
Great point. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, absolutely. Mask during the test time. Like you can't have the water bottle with you. I am one of those people that needs some noise to focus. Like I love my headset in and I'm cranking out notes and whatnot. I won't be able to do that. So like I think I'll get to this in a little bit, but they actually will offer, you can pay and take a smaller fee, but it's still pretty sizable. I think like $100-something, but you can actually pay to take a practice exam either online or in the testing environment. So there's an opportunity to practice in the testing center if you really want to practice within those conditions.
Brittany, I'm gonna say I did that, so I'm happy to answer questions about it later on.
Awesome, Carla.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know some folks who did FO, which is the online practice test. It'll be great to hear your perspective on what that was like.
Just a few other things. So some centers give you noise canceling headphones just so that you can tune out that a little bit. Not guaranteed every center, but I've had that experience at a lot of places. You get a little whiteboard with a marker or a piece of paper and a pencil. Kind of depends on what the testing center is. Also, you can have water and a snack, but it's not in the room. So you could literally go out and they monitor you as you open, so some centers will allow you to be monitored to have a sip of water or snack as long as it's in a clear bag and no labels, like literally nothing on it. So There are some exceptions, but nothing in the room itself.
Passing score is a 500. Let me move on here. So there's weights, the way it gets weighted, it gets all complicated. And I don't know all of that information. I think it talks about it in the manual. So if you really want to understand how they weight the scores and how they break all that down, you can read about that. The jurisprudence, again, this is that psychology law from the Ohio Revised Code. You have to answer correctly 5 questions, and you have the opportunity of up to 2 alternate questions that can be administered. You'll have 1 question from supervision rules, 2 questions from general rules and professional conduct, 1 from kind of other psychology board laws and rules, and 1 from other Ohio laws relevant to the practice of psychology, like the duty to report. Scoring. Okay, so we are going to talk a little bit about scoring. So the scaled scores utilized by ASPPB are an arithmetic conversion of raw scores, the number of questions a candidate answers correctly, to a scale that ranges from 200 to 800. So remember, the 500 is considered passing. Converted scores of 70 or 70%, which is 140 of the questions answered correctly out of those 175 scored questions. You'll receive your unofficial score report upon completion of the exam, but the official results will be reported to the licensing authority, the Ohio board, within 10 days. I should make note, I think there are some states, but very few. New York might be one of them where they actually require a slightly higher passing score. So that's another thing to take a look at in terms of what this, wherever you intend to get licensed, take a look at what they expect. There are 8 core content areas of the EPPP. The percentage that I have next to them is how it's weighted. So 10% of the questions related to biological basis of behavior, 13% related to cognitive affective basis of behavior. I'm not going to read through all these, but you can see like these are the content areas. You'll want to balance this. You don't want to not study research methods and statistics just because it's 7%. Maybe you want to study heavier some of the higher, make sure you're covering more content in some of the areas that have higher weights, but I wouldn't do not use this guide to decide what to not study necessarily. I also think it's worthwhile, and I think we'll talk about more study techniques. Take practice exams or content or domain specific exams and see where your strengths and weaknesses are, and bulk up the bulk up your studying in those other areas that are weaker. But don't bank on just not knowing a certain content area because you're hoping it's weighted less. You don't want to go in with that strategy. So there are lots of materials out there. It can be a little overwhelming. It can also be very pricey. I know when I was looking into this a year or so ago and was like, what, $1,000 for a psych prep or an academic review 3-month online subscription? They're out there and they're expensive. There's many options here. I do encourage you, wherever you end up for internship or maybe other colleagues, keeping in touch with your home university, ask around, ask people what they did. People are more than happy to kind of share, like, here was how I studied. I was really fortunate to get a lot of kind of recommended materials or some hand-me-down, like old hand-me-down stuff that people didn't need anymore. I have one friend that that took the exam and is willing to share those materials, her practice materials. So there might be some opportunities to work collectively together, to kind of share resources and share study materials. This is where you really got to dig deep and know what you need. Do you need a study group? If so, I think the ECP committee is offering a EPPP study support group. Maybe your internship class is large enough you can study together. Wherever maybe you're an individual studier and you need to know what is going to work for you, how this is going to work for you. And then that will help you decide like what kind of materials you need. Some of the best advice I think I've gotten, or maybe more consistent advice I should say, is people will study a content area and take a content or domain quiz, see where they're at. and then study it again if they're weak on it, or move on to the next content area. Study that, take a practice exam of that content area, see where you're at, move forward. So you're kind of evaluating as you go. I've heard from some people that they just take tons of full practice exams. They just pay online. You can pay for practice exams, and they just take practice exams. And it's not necessarily content specific. There's a lot of different ways to go about this. I've heard from one person that they just immersed themselves for a couple weeks, cranked out the studying, took the exam. Other people spread the studying out. I think what I have heard is that this does not need to take you 6 to 9 months to study. That you could, if you're consistent and kind of dedicated and consistently studying, 3 to 4 months, you're pretty on top of it, and you're doing well with the exams, your practice exams or your study measure, and you're mastering this content, you could be ready. It's pass fail. You don't want to aim. I don't want to tell you when to aim for that 70%, but it is pass fail. No one is ever going to know what score you got, but you want to make sure that you're shooting for passing. You're not going to be 100%. Just think about it. There's no way you could know possibly everything there is to know about psychology. You will bog yourself down. You will wear yourself down if you are trying to think of everything. You're trying to remember everything. You got to study enough. And for you, you'll have to be in touch with yourself to know when that is. And talking with other people. I myself got the flashcard app. It's a $30 app that you can download on Google Play and go through flashcard. I love flashcards. There are places where you can buy actual flashcards and practice that way. This also mentions the PEP and the PEPO that I was discussing a minute ago, where you can actually go into a practice test, like a test center for a practice exam, or pay to take one online. So there's lots of options out there. You're going to want to look into these and, again, talk with your networks about what worked for them and what resources are available. And I'm sure we will get into more detail in our Q&A. So definitely each of our panelists can share their personal recommendations.
Brittany, I was going to add that with the study materials, a lot of those practice tests, you have to get a 70% on the actual EPPP. A lot of those practice materials, I don't know if it's to get people to spend more money on them or what, but you very rarely will get a 70%, I think, on a lot of those tests. So if you are finally reaching a point where you're in like the mid to high 60s, then you're in good shape to take the EPPP. I think I only got over a 70% like one time on one of those practice tests, and I did just fine on the EPPP.
Really good. I'm so glad you mentioned that. It's a really great point. I had a supervisor recently tell me, he, just like you said, like did not pass the practice exams, passed the EPPP on the first try. So yeah, something that I think, if we can all resonate with each other for a moment, that we've made it this far because we're high achievers. We don't like to see 60s on anything. There's a bit of that we need to manage in ourselves. I think a lot of this test is how we're going to manage our own anxiety about it, our own expectations about it. And very good. Yes, very good point. All right. I'm just going to give a nod to this. The EPPP Part 2 is a part, so it's not, I think someone said earlier, this is not to replace Part 1. This would actually be in addition to Part 1. Some states that are early adopters would have both parts. So you would take Part 1 and Part 2. Like I said, Ohio is not an early adopter. We do not have a Part 2 in the state yet. We don't even know if we will adopt it. So there's no set date or plan for this to be adopted in Ohio at this time. Which partly is why I bring it up, because you'll be able to read through this a little bit more kind of on your own time. But some of the feedback maybe coming back from the Part 2 is that it's not so helpful from some of the piloters who have like taken the test. And I think I have a quote on the next slide. And so there's ways to maybe advocate or speak to your state board or some other representatives to share your opinions on whether or not to adopt the EPPP Part 2. It's a $600, again, another $600 test, 175 questions, multiple choice, but it is scenario based. So this is not just the knowledge, this is kind of the applicability. of the knowledge is the idea behind it. The review, the beta tester, after taking the pilot, I'm still unsure of the purpose of the part 2, other than as a money-making scheme. It honestly reminded me of a class I took my first year of graduate school before I had seen any therapy clients. My suggestion would be to either try to take the EPPP Part 1 before your state implements Part 2, or get licensed in a state that's not implementing it. So this was one person's perspective. You can see the content. And that's all I'll say about that at this time. Self-care, we've been kind of weaving this throughout, but it is not something to neglect. I had a mentor recently tell me that it was my task to do yoga 15 minutes a day just to train my body to relax. So managing the anxiety of the EPPP, she's like, you will get in your head, you'll second guess, even though it's multiple choice. Obviously, you got to make sure you're paying attention to the wording. There might seem to be multiple right answers, so which is the most right answer, and you don't want to let your anxiety get in your way. If you know you're already not a good test taker, like how are you going to manage that for yourself? So just being mindful of self-care. Again, perfection is the enemy. This is pass-fail, so keep that in mind. For me, setting a schedule and just scheduling the exam, which is in a couple months, was helpful just to help light a fire. Like, I just didn't want this nebulous, like, yeah, eventually I'll get around to the exam. Like, I wanted something set, and so that I could work backwards with the timeline and create a study schedule for myself. Like, that was going to help me break down a monstrous task into like more easier, manageable steps and measurable, because I can take the domain quizzes and see how I'm doing. So knowing yourself and knowing what you need. Allowing for life, give yourself breaks. If you are one of those like immersion people and you just want to like make EPPP all about your life for a couple of months and that's how you're going to manage this, then great. Other people might want to space that out and give yourself breaks. And be kind to yourself. Like I've mentioned, there are some wonderful clinicians out there, directors of training, leaders in our field who needed more than one time to take this test. Just a little bit here, I've kind of woven this throughout. You'll want to look at these sites to know what your state, wherever you want to get licensed, you know, what their state requirements are. There are options for mobility down the road, and we just had SciPac pass. So if you're not up to date on SciPac, check out that website. That's a easy way for mobility, especially in this day and age with telehealth. Banking credentials. I think I talked about this in a previous, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but when you go to apply for licensure, one thing I should say is you will either apply just as a standard application, or you will select the Ohio Plus, which is an extra $200 fee. So that $300 application fee plus another $200 to join the Plus program. The benefit of the Plus is that it stores your credentials forever. So if you do decide down the line you would like to get licensed in another state, there'll be probably a nominal transfer fee, but at least you will have those credentials. First of all, you won't have to go rounding them up again. You never want to have to go back 10 years from now or even 2 years later and try to reach out to old supervisors and get this material. So you're going to want to bank, my opinion, that you would want to bank these credentials in some way. The Ohio Plus is one way to do that. But if you are planning to get board certified, like I mentioned earlier, you can pay, if you're still a student, there's an early entry applicant fee of only $25, and you get access to SciPro, where you can bank your credentials as part of that application process, even if you were to never become board certified. So that is available to you as a banking option. Ohio Plus, like I mentioned, and then there are other paths to mobility. Being board certified is an easier way to be mobile. There's senior provider, kind of late career providers that offer mobility options, international options. So each individual state board website will have this info. And I will throw out there for anyone considering federal work like the VA or maybe a federal prison system, I was thrilled to learn that you can work at any VA in the country with a single state license. So I plan to get licensed in Ohio, but I have accepted a job in Florida, and I'll be licensed in Ohio, working in Florida for the VA. You got to stay VA or stay federal, and that's totally acceptable. So those are some other options depending on your setting of work. They might have different licensure. And that's it. We're going to switch to our Q&A. So I was seeing the chat buzz. I couldn't see what the chat were. So it looks like there's probably a lot of comments and questions that have come in. So thank you to everyone so far for your participation. I have some information here about contact information, how to get involved with OPAGs and ECP. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I can enter this information into the chat. Stop share.
Just a heads up, we've been kind of answering questions as we've been going along, and it's just been mostly comments. I think we've addressed most of them, but if we've missed a question or a comment, please let us know during this Q&A.
Formally, as I mentioned, introduce our fantastic panelists for the evening. So I'll start with Lisa, my co-moderator here, but Lisa received her PhD in clinical psychology from Pacific Graduate School of Psychology. She completed her clinical psych internship with a neuropsychology emphasis at VA Ileana Health Care System in Danville, Illinois. She went on to complete a 2-year clinical neuropsych fellowship in brain injury rehab at Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia. She served a wide range of patient populations, including adults with neurological, neurocognitive, and/or psychological disorders. Her primary clinical interests include acquired brain injury and neurodegenerative conditions. Dr. Hoyman has also provides brief individual psychotherapy as well as psychoeducation groups for dementia and caregiver support. Next, we have Dr. Carla Antonucci. Dr. Antonucci is a licensed clinical psychologist working in private practice. She earned her doctorate in clinical psychology at Xavier University. She specializes in health service psychology at the Cincinnati VAMC for her postdoctoral fellowship. In addition to adult general practice, she serves older adult clients within retirement and long-term care communities. She's extensively trained in geriatric care, including hospice and palliative services. Carla works with clients, their families, and staff to address the unique needs that surface towards the end of life. She enjoys challenges, darts, and appreciation of the world's beauties, both big and small. Next, we have Dr. Alexander Carbaugh. He received his degree from the University of Iowa, completed an APA-accredited internship at Purdue University, and was licensed in 2018. He's co-authored 9 articles and book chapters, participated in multiple research teams, taught, supervised clinicians in training, provided outreach, and currently provides counseling, testing, and administrative support at a college counseling center. And last but not least, Dr. Teresa Young is a licensed psychologist in private practice, specializing in adjustment to aging, illness and disability, and caregiving. She is an adjunct instructor at the Ohio Dominican University. Before moving to Ohio, Dr. Young worked in physical medicine and rehabilitation in Iowa. She completed postdoctoral training in interdisciplinary psychology within the Tennessee Valley VA. She earned her PhD in counseling psychology from Tennessee State University and completed internship with the Vanderbilt EVHS Consortium. Dr. Young provides in-service to organizations in Columbus and is secretary of the Columbus Advisory Committee on Disability Issues. She is chair-elect of the Early Career Committee of OPA. Wonderful panelists. I just want to give a shout out to you all for being here. Thank you for volunteering your time. I understand that each of you have come to the licensure process in many different ways and have a variety of experiences you can speak to. So I am going to just let y'all take this away, and I'll be moderating the chat and here to chime in as needed.
I think there's a specific question, so we could either kind of address questions that pop up or talk about our own personal paths to Ohio licensure and other licensures.
More was there, since I am just getting caught up on the chat, which was specific to start with?
Yeah, it was about pretty much dual state licensure. So essentially, can you be licensed in more than one state? So I think Dr. Young was going to take that one.
Happy to do that. Yeah. So I originally was licensed in Iowa because that's where I worked. And then a couple of years ago, so I'm in my, I think, 4th year as a licensed psychologist now. So a couple of years ago, my husband, who's also a psychologist, and I moved here to Ohio. So we didn't go through kind of the traditional application process. My credentials were banked with the National Register, so I didn't have to send all of that stuff over here. That you can find that on each state. It's called, usually referred to as reciprocity. So by virtue of you being licensed in one state, it can help you get licensed in another. Usually they have time frames in terms of their requirements for jurisprudence and for other exams and things like that. But as of right now, I'm licensed in both, and I do see a few telehealth patients still in Iowa.
I can kind of add on to that. I'm triple licensed, but I started off in Georgia. And I think one of the things that if you're getting licensed in another state, as Dr. Young talked about with reciprocity, it's generally a little bit easier, kind of each state that you add on, not always the case, but generally it's a little bit easier if you have the banking. My credentials are banked through the National Register as well as through Psypro. And so both for Georgia, Ohio, my ABIP certification, and for PsyPact, I think it was all through Psypro. So it was really much easier to have things that were already pre-banked. So you don't have to repeat the process or get your internship advisors or practicum advisors to sign forms. It's a pain in the butt. So if you can bank your credentials, bank them. And as Brittany mentioned with the was it National Register? Yeah, like the free banking or $25 banking for students. Am I thinking of that? Or am I thinking of
That's Psypro, I think.
Psypro. There is National Register also has, you can apply for a scholarship as a student and you can get free banking as a student. So that's something to look into as well. And pretty much most people get the scholarship, just throwing that out there. Just
Yeah,
apply.
I did the same thing too. I got the scholarship. I don't remember it being, you just kind of like, we're like, I'm interested in this. And they're like, here.
Yeah, it's pretty much like a half-page cover letter and you'll get it unless it was really off for some reason. So definitely bank your credentials. It makes the process easier.
Yeah, there is a fee every year. Once you are licensed, they just really gouge you with fees for all kinds of stuff. But with the National Register, there's an annual fee of like $160, I think. Now, I'm in private practice now, so I have to pay that myself. But when I worked at a hospital, the VA doesn't do this, but at a hospital, that was actually included in our licensing and continuing ed fees. And so the hospital would reimburse me for that.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So the more states that you add on, the more, so Brittany is mentioning you have to pay a licensing fee. Well, you have to do that every 2 years, or depending on which state, you have to do it every once in a while. You have to pay that fee and sometimes turn in a few documents, prove your continuing education. Every state has different requirements for how many CEUs you need. Some states don't require any. I think there's a couple that don't have any requirements. And Georgia, for example, you need 40, which is on the higher end. So Ohio is 23. So there's definitely different states have different requirements, and the more states you add on, the more it costs. I will say one thing a supervisor told me is if you get licensed, don't let that license go. Even if you move to another state, it kind of looks bad if you let a license go. So you can get licensed in every single state if you want to. It would probably be overkill, especially with PsyPact now, you can do a lot of telehealth across state lines. So you answer more questions about PsyPact, but there's a lot of resources on PsyPact if you guys want to kind of look into that separately. It's a whole another separate topic, but you don't need to get licensed in every state, probably just a couple or even just one, but the process isn't too bad, but you do need to maintain whatever state that you're getting licensed in.
I would recommend too, if you are planning on doing the federal program, like a prison or a VA, consider that the fact that not every state charges $365 every 2 years. I'm licensed in Iowa, so there's 2 licenses in that state. There's a health service provider license that's $60 that allows you to bill insurance. And then there's a psychologist license that is like, I think $160, and that is much cheaper. So if you are going that route, your annual fee or biannual fee of 220 is a lot cheaper than 365. So some people will get licensed in a state where it's cheaper to keep up with that license.
Any other questions? Can you speak to what it means to bank hours?
Yeah, so each state has a different requirement for the number of hours you need in order to obtain your license. So I think I saw Florida was 4,000, Ohio is 3,600. I think Iowa was 2,500, but I don't know at the time that they counted practicum hours for that. I think it was internship and postdoc. And so what you do is you pay either PsyPro or National Register, and you send your transcripts into them and they hold on to that. You send in your internship verification letter and they hold on to that, your postdoc, and so on. And so then when and if you're moving around from state to state, then you're able to just have all of that information. You don't have to collect it from all of these different sources ever again. You just have the National Register signs a letter saying that you've met all these requirements and here you go.
And to add to that a little bit, so just what it usually entails is they have a document, 1 or 2 pages, that breaks down like where your practicum was or your internship or whatever the clinical service that you were providing was, and what that was. Like it'll break down like individual counseling, group counseling, testing, how much time you were doing like admin or notes, whether you're doing outreach, et cetera, and it'll ask you to like tally up approximately what percentage was devoted to each of those areas, how much supervision you got, kind of like what the ratio of like clinical work to supervision was, and then typically the supervisor needs to sign off on it.
You can bank, which is why I did mention, National Register, where you can get a scholarship as a student, or if you're an early entry applicant into ABAC, you're going to want to do this sooner rather than later. In fact, some of the banking, like as you go verifying practicum experiences, do that in grad school. If somebody had told me about this, going back, I had to reach out to supervisors that I have not spoken to in 3 or 4 years from an early prac, saying, hey, by the way, can you get on to this link on this website and verify this experience was had? They're like, what? And they're digging up old hours. And if you can do this as you go, that's a great, and the banking can be more than just what was needed for licensure. I was able to bank coursework that I did. I'm able to bank specifics about the clients that I saw. I'm able to bank, like demographic information. I'm able to bank, all of my relevant work experience post-licensure. So there's lots that you can add. It's just like an online banking of your professional life and resume.
I'm going to add that when you start applying for licensure, that there will be handouts that you can download for how to document or get those hours signed off on from your different supervisors, so they can be found on that as you register for licensure. And I don't know how everybody else here, if their experience was the same, but for me, I had a lot of old supervisors ask me to actually fill it out almost all the way to the end before sending it, just to lighten their load, because I am requesting them to do additional work and dig. So the more you can do for them by putting those hours in the different sections, like Alex was talking about, that may be better received and they may respond more quickly because they have less work to do.
I agree. I think that's a professional courtesy with a busy supervisor, is to have everything pre-filled out and they just need to verify and sign it. Another thing, as far as banking hours, I think we had a couple of questions. It looks like, where do you bank it? So it's like a cloud. So it's online. So when you have an account, either through National Register or through PsyPro. And I know someone also asked, which one? How do you decide which one? We can talk about that in a second as well. And as Brittany mentioned, get these forms signed early, because I've had a supervisor who died, and then I had to reach out to the next best person, who had any idea about what my training was. They had to pull up my training records, and it was really challenging. So if you can get those forms filled out, it will just save you a lot of time in the long run. and not too much work if you're kind of doing it along the way. Does anyone want to speak to PsyPro versus National Register? How they chose?
I really just chose the National Register because it had been advertised and PsyPro really wasn't at the time. And so that's what I went with.
Yeah, pretty much similar. I didn't know about PsyPro until probably this year, and I just went with the National Register. I had a bunch of their things about the scholarship came through, and I was like, sure, if they're going to do it for free. And I knew I was just going to move to one place and stay there, so I just needed it banked for a short period of time, and they took care of the rest.
Yeah, I think if you're not going to get boarded, if you're not planning on doing that, then I don't know that it really matters all that much. I will say the National Register has a lot of free CEs, so that's pretty nice too.
I just did one of those today. Yeah, so I'm both. So I did PsyPro because I am getting board certified, and I had to do that through my Georgia license. So I already had PsyPro, and I also had National Register, which also gives you a little bit more of a community. They have a listserv. I see Teresa on a lot. So they have a listserv, they have free CEs, they have a lot of other things that PsyPro is really just a cloud banking system, whereas National Register is a little bit more of a community, I would say. And then I think someone else asked about provisional license. I can speak a little bit to that. So I did have to get a provisional license while I was on postdoc. The process is fairly similar depending on the state to getting your actual license. You still have to do all the background check, and you still have to have a lot of the same requirements, except some states you don't have to have certain aspects of it. I think like EPPP wasn't a requirement for Georgia specifically. So I think there's a few things that you can bypass temporarily. You have to do them eventually to get your full license, but there's a few steps you can skip in order to be provisional, which is what a lot of companies do. They can still bring you on board even if you're not quite licensed yet. They just can't bill for you. That's a whole nother separate, or they can bill it in their name instead of you can't bill under your name. So there's a few limitations, but some jobs will take you if you're provisional versus full license. So that does give you a little bit of flexibility with jobs if you're a little bit postponed of getting licensed.
I just hit my 1-year license anniversary. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm learning a lot from this, just I'm sure like all the other folks that have joined in, because I haven't done anything like a registry bank yet or moved forward with that, just trying to get settled and navigate early licensure life right now.
There was a question in the chat about, can you take the EPPP while still doing a postdoc if you verify your hours using Practicum? Yes, absolutely. You can get licensed in Ohio with internship and practicum hours, whether you do a postdoc or not. But keep in mind that if you verify and your license is under prac and internship, some states won't accept that. They want you to verify and be licensed with postdoc hours. So you just have to be mindful about what the state's requirements are. Yes, in Ohio, while you're on postdoc, if you want to get fully licensed and use your practicum hours to verify because you want to get licensed as soon in the year as you can, you absolutely can do that. I would just be mindful about what that means, what those, I don't want to say consequences, sounds like such a strong word, but like what those ramifications are depending on your future ideas of mobility.
But you can apply and take the EPPP as soon as you're done with internship. One of my postdoc mates had already taken it when he started postdoc, and he was just so much more relaxed than the rest of us.
Oh yeah, I know a couple of people that were smart and did it that way. If I didn't make clear, absolutely, you can take you just can't sit for jurisprudence. You can't complete licensure. You can't actually be formally and totally and completely licensed until you have met those hour requirements. So that might mean if you want to get licensed using your internship and postdoc hours, that might mean that you cannot take jurisprudence until later in the year when you've met those in Ohio 3,600 hours. So you can just make that very clear. We have another question. What would happen if you got licensed in Ohio with prac hours, but then later needed to move to another state with a different requirement? That's a great question. I don't know if our panelists want to field that or have experience with that.
I'm not entirely sure what would happen in that scenario. I would imagine, though, like most state boards are pretty flexible and want to work with people. So it probably depends on how long you've had your Ohio license. So if you've been practicing independently for 5 years, then I doubt that other state boards would make you get that supervision. I will say there has been a movement within APA as like a model licensing program to get people to allow practicum hours to count. So more and more states are doing that.
That being said, I know California, for example, is very strict with their licensing. And so they even have specific classes, coursework that you need to have taken that most people don't have addiction, for example. So you have to, I know a lot of people who have been licensed in California, where I went to grad school, who had to go take like a supplemental class while they were on internship or while they were on postdoc for coursework. So yes, some states may work with you, but some states may not. And so you might need to make up those hours, whether it's informally or get them in another way or extra coursework or whatever requirements are. You may need to go get those. So that's something to keep in mind if you're really looking at a state that you're like, oh, I want to end up in California. Take a look at their requirements because they might be a bit more strict than Ohio, for example.
I'm just wondering if you were doing a postdoc. If you were on postdoc and eventually did complete that and you moved to the state that required it, I wonder if it would be as simple as just verifying that with them. Just, giving them that updated information.
I think you kind of broke up there a little bit, Brittany.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry. I was just going to say, I wonder if in the particular situation that was asked about, you were doing a postdoc, you were on postdoc. So I wonder if it would be as simple as being able to just send in that verification form to the new state wherever you were wanting to get boarded. So it might be that it would just update that information potentially in the best of scenarios. Alex, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had that specific experience of needing to move to a different state, but I, like everybody else said, I think you're going to get a range. Like some states have grandfather clauses where like if you've been practicing for 10 years, you might just be able to kind of like scoot in. Some states, if you contact the board and kind of explain your situation and, potential difficulties, but then, yeah, I think definitely like, I would guess probably California and New York are probably some of the more stringent states. That might have classes or addition, and I think that's probably the worst case scenario is that you just have to get supervision, probably either where you're moving or where you're at, to fulfill like a postdoc, like an informal postdoc. And so I think another question came up about additional supervision post licensure for transferring to another state. I assume, yeah, you can do that, too.
And just as there are lots of opportunities if you need additional hours, say you're in another state or whatever, and you needed extra hours, there's lots of opportunities. If someone's in private practice, you can actually kind of hire them as a consultant or as a supervisor to help get some of those more supervised hours that you're in need of. So there's always possibilities, not necessarily having to do, go do a 1-year formal postdoc. There's other ways to get some of those supervised hours, depending on the state. Again, you want to check on if they require formal versus informal, what kind of hours they require. But something else that kind of popped into my head, if you are going to get licensed in multiple states or transfer to other states, one thing to keep in mind is those CE credits requirements. For example, Georgia has 40, Ohio has 23. Those 40 and those 23 hours don't necessarily overlap. So there's certain requirements for your continuing education credits that can be different. So Georgia has, you have to have 6 credits of ethics, where Ohio, we need something a little bit different combination. So different states might have some different requirements that may or may not overlap. So just think about that if you are getting dual or triple licensed or whatever, just to be aware of that. Most of the time they do overlap, so it's nice, but just kind of keep that in mind as well. And as Teresa said, a lot of jobs do give you a CEU stipend, especially at hospitals. Your private practice, obviously you're covering that on your own, but CEs do cost money. You going to conferences, things like that. CEs do cost money, so keep that in mind if you are applying for jobs in the future, or if you're thinking about private practice, kind of where you're ending up. That is another expense to think about. But a lot of places do offer a stipend, and if they don't, you should ask for it in your contract.
I write mine off as a business expense.
Absolutely.
I think also something, and maybe some of the other panelists can clarify this, but I also I think there are certain ratios of clinical hours to supervision that you need for licensure, and it may be different for other states. So you really need to be careful that you have the right ratio. I think it was in Ohio, it's been a little while for me, but I think it was 1 supervision hour for every 20 clinical hours, and anything above that, you had to have another supervision hour on top of it. Am I
That's
remembering
right.
that correctly?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of places, if it's maybe one benefit of an accredited program is that's kind of assume that it's meeting those standards. But definitely a great point, Alex, because if you are trying to find hours in another way, you want to make sure that you're looking into those particulars and then structuring that training. Yes. One other thing that popped into my mind as we're talking about just state to state differences, I did mention that, working in VA or working in the federal government, you can have a single state license and practice at any VA. But there's a couple caveats. So you have to make sure some licenses will require that you have been supervised by a certain state. I think California gets tricky about this. If you're Ohio licensed and you end up wanting to work in California, you can't supervise. So they might be able to hire you on with a Ohio license, but then you won't be able to supervise their trainees without a California license, because California requires that you, I guess, I'm hearing this through another person, are required to be supervised by someone with a California license. So when you consider your career goals too and where you want to end up, there could be some limitations depending on what your license is and who you can, what kind of trainees you can. That's just another thought I had. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any new questions in the chat. This is a great discussion. Thanks. Let me see. Oh, thanks so much for your time. The information is actually it sounds like a number of you may be from other states. Is there anyone with the experience of going through the process in Ohio, and how you decided whether to go above the 3,600 hours or do a postdoc? If you were planning on staying in Ohio? I guess I'm trying to decide whether it's just a good idea to go beyond just in case.
I mean, it doesn't hurt to go beyond while you're still in training and you have access to free hours in grad school. That's what I would recommend. But again, if you move somewhere else and you need to kind of pay for some extra supervision, that's just kind of the reality of it, but it's available if you kind of network and ask about it, or join the state that you're interested in, join their state psych association and kind of branch out and see if there's those opportunities to get supervision. So I'd say kind of just depends what your preference is. I don't think you need to stress out about getting above and beyond the 3,600 if you're thinking about Ohio, but doesn't hurt, again, while you're getting some free training, free hours, if you can add a few more in here and there. Why not?
I was always told throughout graduate school, wherever you're going to go, wherever you think is going to have the highest stringent, requirements for licensure, just aim for that, especially when you're still in training. And yeah, like what Lisa had said, while the hours are still free and you don't have to pay for supervision.
Yeah. And there were some questions. All of these slides and materials will be made available to you. And the links to being able to see the state by state differences are included. And so, yes, all of these materials you'll be able to have access to all these links. Absolutely. And then great point by Virginia. So beginning in July, PsyPac will be in effect in Ohio. Whoop, whoop. That's what you were talking about earlier, got signed. This means that you'll have authorization to practice telepsychology in 20 states with your Ohio license.
But a little caveat to that, you do have to apply to PsyPac. You don't just get you're licensed in Ohio or a PsyPac state, you get to start doing telehealth wherever. You still have to apply through PsyPac and be, licensed through PsyPac if you want to do it that way.
And pay.
And pay, yeah. And pay. And it's an annual fee as well. So always things to think about. But it is a separate, very easy, relatively easy process, especially if you've already banked your materials. It's pretty much you click a bunch of things and pay some money and you're back relatively soon, at least in my case.
I had just one other, I had a couple other points from like the slides that I just wanted to kind of like chime in on. Let's see. So regarding like materials, again, when you're an internship or postdoc, at least a lot of people that I've heard of, places will just have either like a bank of materials that might be available to you, or you can talk to the clinicians. Additionally, if you actually get hired on to a place or you do a more formal postdoc, in my experience, I was allowed to use my continuing education fund however I wanted it. So they actually let me use that money to buy study material. So I actually bought the psych prep materials and just ran with that. And so that was an option. So that might be something, if somebody's doing a postdoc, to, talk to them about, see if they're open to that sort of thing.
I asked my postdoc, I asked if they would pay for my ATABS materials, which are $900 or something like that. And they said yes. So that was, they agreed to do that. And they said, if you take it by the state, yes, we'll pay for it.
So I am aware that we are brushing up on kind of the end of our time this evening. We haven't talked a ton about studying and materials. I'm glad that we started on that thread, but any other questions? We have time for a few more here.
I did have one more thought about EPPP stuff that I don't think I saw in the thing, is that some of the items on the EPPP are in development items, so they will not count towards your score, and they might be really hard or bizarre. And so if you feel like, oh my gosh, what is this? I didn't study for this. It may be just like an in development item as well that they're just testing out on you.
I told myself that to cope throughout the entire exam. I was like, maybe that's that's a test question. Just move on.
Some online flashcard websites like Quizlet or I can't think of any others right now, but people have made accounts and then made EPPP flashcards on there. So then if you make an account, you can either email them and ask through that if you can see theirs, or some have them on there for free. So that's a really great resource to use. I would say flashcards for free like that, and going in person to take the expired exam in the test setting, especially if you are anxious with a new environment and you like that familiarity. It was so helpful, and it calmed me down so much just to get your score. Did you pass those 100 questions? And honestly, even if you don't, I have a friend who took the practice in the at the site. She failed it and she passed the real EPPP. So either way, it's kind of it's a nice learning lesson. You get familiar with the technology, the cool highlighting tool and strike through tools that are available. It's really excellent.
It was funny when I passed, they give you this like printout sheet with your score on it. And I was like, I passed. And the woman working there was just like, okay, like she didn't care. It's like, I'll go call somebody and tell them.
That's to get a lot. I mean, that's gonna be
And another EPPP tip, I would time yourself when you're taking some of the practice tests so that you know how long it's taking you. I'm generally a really fast test taker. And when I did the actual EPPP, I was there the entire time, like up to the last like 30 seconds, which I don't know anyone else who stayed that long, but I used the entire time and I was not planning on it. So it's good to kind of practice your timing, especially when you're getting to those 25, maybe not being used questions as sample questions. You kind of second guess yourself. So practice with time just so that you kind of have a nice pace built up when you're doing those practice tests. I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think one of the things that I noticed as I started taking practice tests is really carefully reading the question. A critique of the EPPP is that because so many people pass, in some ways it almost seems like an English proficiency exam because it's about your ability to accurately read the question. So that's something that you'll want to really attend to as you're taking those practice tests, because you'll see things like which is the best way to do something.
Yeah, sometimes you can find an answer by like carefully reading it and carefully reading the answers and be like, does this make sense? Or like, and you can kind of figure it out just through the test taking skills. Sorry, Carla.
Oh, you're fine. Something I found to be really helpful for me, because you can get indecisive, or you can really talk yourself into thinking, well, A, B, C, and D could apply if, so I started, when I went through my test, I would reflect on, why did I get this answer wrong? Did I switch it at the last minute? Did I second guess? And I would remember my common errors, like switching at the last minute because I'm indecisive, and try to not do that and just stick with my gut. So know the types of errors that you make, that you're prone to, try to fight against it.
There are some study materials that I can't remember off the top of my head what brand. When you take the exam, they'll tell you why you got it wrong or why you got it right. And those, from what I hear from colleagues, are some of the most helpful, getting that reasoning.
Yeah, psych prep I know does that. There were a few times where it's like, this is just something you need to know. Thanks. But you'll notice, regardless of whether or not you do the flashcards or take the practice test, you'll know that there are some questions that are just gonna be on there.
I'm not sure if it'd be helpful, but I mean, I can just share a little bit about my experience of when I started, prepping and how I did that. I don't know if maybe we had some time to talk a little bit about each of our experiences. Would that be helpful?
Raven will have to leave us here in a moment. I want to let her, if she had any final thoughts, and then yes, Alex, I think if you want to offer that insight, that'd be fine.
Yeah, so I do have to head out in a minute, but I think one thing with our ECCC study groups, I think that actually might be a good time to cover a little bit more strategy. So I think Carla is running that, right? You're running that.
Yeah, I'll send out another email to get some bites. Interest has been low lately, so I'd love to send that out again and see if we get more bites on it.
Yeah, so I just real quick, I'm an overstudier, so I did study for 9 months, hours and hours a day, because that's how I study. Most people do not do that. As Brittany mentioned, you need to pass. You don't need to get a 99%. So just pass. But you do need to put in some time. But you don't need to study for the full 9 months. I'd say most people are about 4 months studying a good several hours a day and on weekends. It is a lengthy process. So if you're doing those 3-4 months, that's pretty much what you're doing most of the time after school or internship or whatever it is that you're doing at that time. So that's my little spiel, but I'm going to head out, but thanks everyone for joining us, and I'll let everyone else take it away.
See ya.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
I know we've been sending that out on the ECP listserv. Maybe we can open that up to tags. Maybe that's the discussion that we can have if some of these graduate student members want to try and participate in some studying.
Yeah, that would be great. I sent it to student and early career, so I'm happy to send it again. And while I'm talking, I'll just add my experience with studying for the ECCC. I did it in 3.5 months. And if anybody's worried about finances and affording all these study things, if you can get your hands on old materials, that'll do. And I don't know if anybody else has hoarded all of their binders from graduate school, but I did, and it's taking time to let go of them, but going through binders or reading important materials or outlines from school was incredibly helpful for me. I think I spent $150 minus, signing up for the ECCC by going to the in-person practice test and getting those flashcards. That was it. Everything else was going through my own notes, going through the DSM, which has so much information that is relevant. If you just read the DSM, is very helpful, and just going through old notes.
I'm going to put a link in the chat for a feedback. It's a very brief online survey through SurveyMonkey. If you would not mind giving us some feedback, we would really appreciate it, just to let us know how this experience was. And there's an opportunity to select maybe different topics from future presentations that might be of interest. So I'm going to drop that in here, but then I just want to thank everyone and hand this over to Alex.
All right. Yeah. So just a real quick rundown. At the outset, you have to kind of study the way that you study. If you're a graduate student and you made it this far, you know how to study. Like you have your style. And so again, couch this, and this is my style. I'm a little bit more like slow and steady. In internship, I didn't think about, studying for the EPPP until like the very end. I picked up like one of those apps for flashcards and some study materials. I did that just cursory, just kind of getting a feel for it. I actually found that a lot of the flashcard questions were way harder than the test. Similarly with some of the practice tests, I think I took like one practice test that was also like really hard. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. How do I do this? And then I kind of waited until I got a postdoc and / job. They paid for psych prep for me. And I literally kind of followed the psych prep, thing. And where I would just study, I'd study for like when I woke up in the morning, study for an hour, and then I'd study for an hour in the evening, just because I was working, full time throughout that process. And just that like slow, steady process following their guides. They send you a big binder, and then you also have they have like an online portal. And so I'd read a chapter, I'd take a practice test / quiz, read a chapter, take a practice test / quiz. And then you'd also get like feedback. They'll tell you like why you got various questions wrong. You could also consult with somebody. You could like email somebody like, I don't understand why this is this way. And they would give you feedback about that. And so I ended up, I was working for a university. And so I ended up taking EPPP probably around spring break. And I took it actually like in the middle of spring break because I had some time off then. And so I knew like I wouldn't have to be working. I could spend a little bit of extra time right at the end prepping. I could also like chill for a minute and then take the exam, kind of recoup, and then have to start working regardless of what happened. I passed, first try. And so I just kind of did what psych prep told me to do, and it worked out. And then I took my my jurisprudence exam over the summer, a couple months later. And that was my process.
Yeah, it really does. You got to know yourself. You got to know what's going to work for you, very much so. Well, this was fantastic. We are right at 7:30. Thank you so much for all of our panelists for being here and sharing your insights and your advice. And thanks to all of our participants. You guys had some fantastic questions. This was a great discussion. We hope it was helpful. Please take a moment to complete that SurveyMonkey quiz. And hope you all enjoy your evening. Thank you for spending Cinco de Mayo with us.